This clip doesn't feature you, but I wanted to ask you about the story about the World Central Kitchen.
Of these bodies and these passports in the hospital that confirm these were our people. At the end is what we know, what everybody knows, that 17 members between the specialty security people we have, 3 British individuals and 3 international crew plus 1 Palestinian, that they were targeted systematically, car by car. They attacked the first car. We're still trying to get all the information on what happened on the first car. We have a feeling they were able to escape safely because it was an armored vehicle. This was only the third day we had armored vehicles. We've been 6 months trying to bring them in. But the first armored vehicle was hit. They were able to escape. We still don't know all the details on the events in terms of people injured or people even dead. They were able to move in the second one. Again, this one was hit. They were able to move in the third one. In the process, we know they were trying to call. But in the chaos of the moment, whatever happened, they to try to be telling IDF that what are they doing, that they were targeting us in the conflicting zone, in an area controlled by IDF, them knowing that was our teams moving on that route with 3 cars. And then they hit the third one, and then we saw the consequences of that continuous targeting attack. 7 people dead.
I wanted to take a look at what John Kirby said about it.
Well, on the point of conditions, the President on February 8th issued a memo, and it said, and you already know this, but just for context, it said that it was the policy of this administration to prevent arms transfers that risk facilitating or otherwise contributing to violations of human rights or international humanitarian law. Is firing a missile at people delivering food and killing them not a violation of international humanitarian law?
Well, the Israelis have already admitted that this was a mistake that they made. They're doing an investigation. They'll get to the bottom of this. Let's not get ahead of that. Your question presumes, at this very early hour, that it was a deliberate strike, that they knew exactly what they were hitting, that they were hitting aid workers and did it on purpose, and there's no evidence of that. I would also remind you, sir, that we continue to look at incidents as they occur. The State Department has a process in place. And to date, as you and I are speaking, they have not found any incidents where the Israelis have violated international humanitarian law. Unless you think we don't take it seriously, I can assure you that we do. We look at this in real time.
They have never violated international humanitarian law ever in the past 5 to 6 months.
I'm telling you, the State Department has looked at incidents in the past and has yet to determine that any of those incidents violate international humanitarian law.
So we'll get to that second point about Israel never having violated international law. But the first part, the way he reacts to that question about the Israeli attacks on the World Central Kitchen. Tell us your thoughts on that. There you can see how clearly labeled it is, by the way. I think Brad is putting that in there to remind us how.
It literally says it where the bomb dropped into.
Yeah, it says it there and on the windowsill, right? Yeah. Right. So while they were looking at it, they would have to have seen.
But there's no way
we're bombing right now.
There's no way they could have known, according to that piece of crap.
Yeah.
It is very interesting to imagine the United States, the White House, Republican or Democratic administration, responding to any sort of analogous situation that didn't involve this specific set of nations in this way. Even if it's early, which of course, it is early, you want to naturally follow investigations as they proceed. But generally speaking, if United States and United States ally humanitarian aid workers were killed in any country, in any sort of active conflict zone, active war zone, the first statement would not be so deferential to the alleged perpetrators. At the very least, there would be a sort of baseline condemnation of things that have been seen like this in the past, regardless of whatever we're going to call them. Even if we're just going to call them mistakes or accidents, there would be some sort of baseline condemnation for this type of behavior. And then, of course, a sort of strong urging, a strong eagerness, an insistence on the investigation, perhaps even a veiled threat of some sort accompanying it, something that shows that the United States means business, as President Biden famously said just months ago. If you harm an American, we will respond. Very simple,
We
very,
respond.
very
Yeah.
straightforward. You would see some form of that level of seriousness. But here, again, Kirby does say there's an investigation to be had, but he's much more dismissive of the fact that this happened at all. Like there's no sort of strong baseline condemnation of this kind of incident. It's sort of the same kind of response that we've seen over and over again of course we don't want to see something like this. Because there's, as we know, materially there is up to this point have not been teeth behind such a sentiment. I think this kind of reminds me of a dynamic that we've seen sort of throughout the past 6 months, where Israeli forces commit one grade of an atrocity. The US perhaps condemns it in some way and then says that, they're engaging with the government of Israel to investigate. That investigation kind of exists in the ether, often exists in limbo, particularly if we don't, as journalists, follow up on them specifically. And of course, that's increasingly more difficult as these violations, alleged violations, continue to pile up. In the meantime, during that limbo, there's no material consequence, as we've seen. And afterwards, that level, that grade of atrocity at hand is then done en masse before Israeli forces escalate further to a higher grade of atrocity, all for that cycle to repeat over and over again. Because it's worth noting that this is, of course, an awful tragedy, a brutal violation, seemingly, by the Israeli government. But these are not the first aid workers. These are not the first people who have been simply described as helpers to have been targeted and attacked, whether that's aid workers, doctors, nurses, journalists, even
Right.
just neighbors trying to help each other. This is not the first time, of course.
7 people dead, but there are 7 on top of a list of more than another 190 humanitarian workers that they've been killed over the last 6 months. Humanitarians and civilians should never be paying the consequences of war. This is a basic principle of humanity. At the time, this looks like it's not a war against terrorism anymore. Seems this is a war against humanity itself. You cannot be destroying every building. You cannot be destroying every hospital, every school. You cannot be targeting humanitarian. You cannot be targeting children. You cannot be fighting the basis of what humanity should be standing for. Even if we were not in coordination with the IDF, not democratic country and not military can be targeting civilians and humanitarians, especially when the technology today allows you to know things in ways not too long ago was not possible. Those drones have eyes on everything that moves in Gaza. I've been there. This is drones non-stop flying above you. Is nothing that moves that IDF doesn't know.
Of course, there's a level of higher relevancy because of their association with Jose Andres, because of the fact that some of these people are from the West. Regardless, it's
Sure.
horrifying. But throughout all that cycle as well, I think it's worth noting too that, as we have seen throughout these 6 months, we've heard largely identical in proportion responses from the White House and State Department to each of these atrocities at each level as well. As in, regardless of how much these atrocities continue to sort of increase in severity and gradation, the response is largely the same materially, but also rhetorically. And that kind of functions to normalize the entire arc of this conflict as being sort of equally bad throughout, rather than what we have seen as something that has only gotten increasingly brutal on part of the Israeli forces.
I mean, it literally is enabling these crimes when you fail to respond to them, when there is literally no response. And as a lot of people are pointing out in the comments, of course, when you're an American, nothing happened after Rachel Corrie was killed. Nothing happened after Shireen Abu Akleh was killed. Nothing happened after a Palestinian American whose name I can't recall, who lived in Palestine, a grandfather was killed.